Now it gives me great joy to introduce our keynote speaker, my friend Anna Maria Chávez. Anna Maria Chávez is the Chief Impact Officer of the story teaching platform Encantos, as well as the president of Encantos.org, the company's philanthropic arm. She joined Encantos earlier this year at a pivotal time in the company's growth, and I'm excited to learn more about what she's up to today. Ana Maria, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Hello, hello. Patty, great job. I was like taking notes. I was so busy taking notes from you that I didn't even see Pedro come on screen. So thank you, Patty. Words of wisdom. Robert, awesome job. Pedro, excited to be here with everybody.
Likewise, so great to see you. I wish I had a cooler background like yours.
I'm very excited to bring you into my world of Encantos and my life.
So let's talk about that world. As I mentioned earlier, you started in your new role as Chief Impact Officer. Share with us today what a Chief Impact Officer does, what Encantos does, and your leap from the nonprofit world to the startup world of ed tech. What sparked the move? What attracted you to join the Encantos team?
Well, I think, first of all, you should take all the credit, Pedro, and your team should take all the credit because there I was having a wonderful time leading the team at the National School Boards Association, and you contacted me to go, let's say, be a guest editor for your 10th anniversary edition of the Top 10 Leaders.
The current
And
one.
right? Because I'm that old. Because remember when I was on the cover many, many years ago, and I had the great pleasure of interviewing all the top 10 leaders, and I met Stephen Wolf Pereira. And if you've ever met Stephen Wolf Pereira, you know why I was so attracted to join his team. He is a leader that really walks the talk. We spent time not only talking about what he was doing at Encantos, but what he was trying to do for our community.
Mm.
And I was so struck by this concept of working in an organization that is led by diverse leadership, where
Right.
70% of our investors are Black or Brown, and that I could be who I am authentically every single day of my life. And so when he approached me and said, "We'd love to create a role for you. Would you join us to create even bigger impact for kids?" I said, "Sign me up." So that's how I
That's
made
great.
the transition.
That's incredible. You mentioned that. I had no idea it was literally for this issue that we just put out where you met Steve.
Literally.
That's incredible. Well, yeah, we will take the credit, but no, I'm glad that happened. I think that's fantastic. So it's still very early in your role as a chief impact officer, but what changes have you made since joining? What's the goal for your role, and what's next for Encantos?
So, I always believe that you're put on this earth to make impact. So I've been a chief impact officer all my life, even when I was 12 years old, as my mother would say. And I think this just crystallized. I was putting out into the universe over the last year and a half during the pandemic that I'm able to provide my skills and my passion and experience toward a larger scalable goal.
Hmm.
And I believe, because I wasn't looking for it, I believe that this is why the universe connected me with Stephen and Encantos and the Encantos team, because I've been sitting in public education for the last year and a half. I was leading an organization that represented 90,000 local school board members.
Wow.
And if you've been reading the news the last year and
Yeah.
a half, you know that those 90,000 school board members have been at the front line of education and the discussions. And do we close schools? Do we open schools? Do we
Right.
mask? Do we not mask? And now, do we vaccinate? And so I knew that the future of education was authentically and irreparably connected to technology moving forward.
Hmm.
I also know that because of technology, now in my role at Encanto as social impact officer, is that they're also creating a new economy online.
Hmm.
So with cryptocurrency and the metaverse and the fact that You've got all of these new ways of exchanging wealth.
Right.
Now they're moving all of that wealth onto these platforms. It's now a creator economy. I wanted to make sure that every day at Encantos, we ensure that diverse story teachers who have IP, who have their own sort of well tied into their brand, into their creative arts, also get to play in this new wealth economy that's now virtual, online, with its own cryptocurrency. So
Wow.
that's what I get to do every day. It's amazing.
That's amazing. I mean, talking about the impact of the last 18 months on our community uh, could be a conversation that is ongoing. Obviously, it could take up a whole 24-hour show, so to speak. Um, but it's interesting to hear. Really, what one of the things that you're trying to do in many ways is make sure that we're not left behind with the adoption of these digital technologies. Would you say
Absolutely.
that's yeah?
Well, and people always ask me because there's a theme in my career, uh, and that is I'm an activist, I'm an
Mm,
advocate, right? At the end of the day, I'm a civil rights attorney. And in every role I've had for the last 25 years, it's always been how can I join forces with individuals who have the same mission, that's to create positive impact for communities, more importantly, to break down barriers and open up space for equal participation. And what I saw in the school systems across the country, and shall I remind everybody on this call today that public school districts were built on laws in this country of redlining certain communities.
right,
And so the tax base that are now codified in housing zones and laws basically have created a system where the investment into public education is not the same in every zip code.
right.
And so I'd been in that, shall we say, fight for a very long time. And then I realized because of the pandemic, all of a sudden, we now have virtual schools. And now we have private tech companies coming in and basically creating platforms to draw in the 51 million kids in our lives in the United States. So I basically took my, what I would call my warrior sticks, and jumped, right? Because I come from an indigenous background. So I jumped into the fray. And I will tell you, it was the scariest thing I've done in a very long time.
Well, it sounds like you've landed on your 2 feet and you're running, which is fantastic. And I think one thing that I admire about Encantos and the work that you do is that you're creating content for not just Latino community, but certainly an underserved community, I would say. And that's one thing that we hear, whether it's the digital divide or content or Latinos in media, is that there's a lack of Latinos in those spaces. Today's program is about Latinos in the professional space, and you also hear that narrative often. There's a lack of Latinos in leadership positions, uh, which we're all aware of. But I feel like the work that Encantos is doing and the work that Robert is doing, the work that the ERG members that are on this call today are doing, is adding to the numbers. And I just have to feel that that lack of is going to become an abundance of, whereby there's going to be just an inundation of content that's Latino, leaders that are Latino. And maybe I'm naive, but I have to be optimistic. Do you feel that's the case? And do you think the business community is ready for that outcome? Or do you think we're ready for that outcome?
Well, one, we are ready. We were born ready. And two, I don't think we leave it up to the business community to be ready. We're here,
That's right.
right? And it is up to us to embrace the fact that we're ready. I think part of this is also just, and I think Patty is the one who spoke about this, about the difference between sponsoring and mentoring, because I think we need to surround ourselves with people who will show us the playbook, who will encourage us to jump
Mm.
in. I recently, just a few weeks ago, had the opportunity to speak at Apple, and I was actually invited by the ERG groups at Apple.
Wow.
Like, right? And so I live with Apple products, iPhone, iPads. And there I was speaking to Apple and employees, and they were unbelievable. But I got some questions afterwards, and people connected me with me offline, and I was had this call with an amazing young Latina engineer at Apple who was first generation, was still pinching herself that she was at Apple and had been there for a while. And as I talked to her about, well, where do you want to go? Where do you want to be seen? And all that, and what's your next progression in your career? And she's like, wow, well, I guess I should talk to somebody about it. And as she started talking to her peers, she found out that she was making less than the male engineers on her team. So the first time, I think, in her 5-year career at Apple, she set up a meeting with her supervisor and said, I'd like to discuss my salary. So it's so simple. I know it doesn't seem simple, but for me, it's literally connecting with people who have knowledge of the bigger systems to say it's okay to ask questions and to be your own advocate. And that's why these ERG groups are so important.
Right.
Right? Because you are those advocates internally who are saying, no more. We need full inclusion and respect.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right, and I think you're right about sort of the one of the importance of gatherings like today. The more that we connect with each other, understand what we're doing, whether it's something like the formation of a ERG group or best practice, or so something more specific like pay, I think the better we are for it, because that starts to, I think, expand outward. And I think all of us need to really be asking those questions, connecting with each other, and is just it's hopefully a virtuous cycle that really sort of moves all of us up along uh, where we want to go.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You've always seemed struck me as someone. Obviously, you mentioned you were a chief impact officer at the age of 12. Um, you're someone that's always been driven by a higher calling, and you know, I think one time when I saw you, I thought, is running for political office something that you would aspire to do? But when all's said and done, what is the legacy of Ana Maria Chavez? What are you building?
So I think it's a good question to ask you because I've been thinking a lot about that, right? As you pass the golden arches of 50, right? And I'm very proud to be 53. I reflect back on, especially over this past 20 months of this horrific pandemic. I've lost family members to COVID over the last year. It's very sad. Too many wakes, too many funerals. And I keep harping back to my grandmother told me growing up why I was placed on this earth. I just happen to be a very devout person, so I always elevate sort of my work to a higher purpose. And I think that's why, I do get pushed to do things. I don't know if I'll ever run for public office because to be honest, I've been behind that curtain for so many years. I know what you have to do to be elected in the United States. And I'm just not that mean. I hate to put it out there. Not that all politicians are mean, but you've got to sort of pivot who you
Yeah.
are and change. And I'm just hardcore wired to be an advocate to,
Great.
unfortunately, as some people would say, advocate for people who are poor, advocate for people who may not have a voice. And so that's not really popular when you're running for office. And so I've chosen to lead in public service a different way. So I hope that, God forbid I'm taken from this earth, people would say she fought a good fight for
Mm,
people who needed her to fight on their behalf. That's what I hope people say.
that's wonderful. So what did your grandmother say? I missed the what was the advice she gave?
Oh,
Why were you
my
put on
grandma
this?
had a lot of great advice. She basically told me that, Ana Maria, sometimes you just have to put yourself in the middle of things to help people because a lot of times you won't receive that invitation formally. And so she just taught me, Mijita, head down. This was all in Spanish, of course. She would teach me these things. Head down, learn, be observant, be kind, understand that people need help.
Mm,
Always look to help. So that's what she taught me. And along the way, I think that's why I've been a change agent because I've been put into organizations, especially old legacy organizations, to change those legacy systems
mm,
to provide more leadership opportunities to people who aren't traditionally leaders in those organizations, and to open up the lens of who the customer and beneficiary is of that company or that organization.
That's
So she
great.
said, just keep on fighting.
That's great. It's the opposite of what my grandmother said. She said, "Calladito más bonito." So, but
Works both ways.
yeah. And so there's probably people on this call that are wondering, how do you line up your personal mission with the mission of the organization? Um, Maybe they like the company they're at, but they haven't figured out ways to sort of get that alignment between what they want to do in life and their role. What advice would you give someone that's trying to figure that out, trying
Wow.
to
That,
align?
wow. That's a really good question. And I'm trying to be honest
Yeah.
about that, because I think, again, that's why our participants today are in the roles they're in, because they realize, for whatever reason, the organization really needs to create a safe space, an
Mm,
inclusive space for people who have a common identity. And I think that that's the important sort of focus of their work, because not every organization will do that.
right.
So we can choose to lean in and create that space for ourselves and others and show the way. But I think it's also important that the leadership of the company and organization also reflects what we want to be part of every day.
Right.
I think it's really
Well,
important.
yeah, I love that. So before you wrap up, I want to end with a call to action. Part of the mission of these summits, in many ways, is to certainly inspire people to transform themselves, transform their ERG groups, but also perhaps drive change with their colleagues internally. Uh, how can the members of ERG groups joining us today help in the mission of Encantos, the mission of Encantos.org?
So what I would say is, and this is me on bended knee talking to all of you, I'm, because of my experience, I'm able to really draw a line through dots and data. And I will tell you, I keep coming back even after 20 years, where I started 20 years ago working on behalf of Children and Child Protective Service and foster care and juvenile corrections. Education is the key. It is the equalizer. It breaks poverty from one generation to the next. You of all people know that an individual who's able to earn a living wage, who has health care and benefits and the ability to succeed in life, is so important. But if they don't get a good education, they're never going to get a fulfilling role to help their family and help actually build wealth generation between generation. And so that's why I'm in education, because I saw what happened during this pandemic here in the United States, but globally. And if you look at the data that's coming out, you're seeing that, of course, McKinsey just came out with a report last week that shows that on average here in the United States, kids are 5 months behind in math and 4 months behind in reading. But if you look at kids of color and you look at kids
Yeah,
living below the poverty level, they're actually much farther behind
right.
than their cohorts. And so if you're thinking about your employee base and the pipeline of talent, we've got to start with the little leaders. I call them the littles. And I know, because I was sitting around the budget table back in Arizona in the early 2000s, where our director of corrections was calculating the amount of construction dollars she needed for new prison beds based on the third grade dropout rate in Arizona. That's how early it starts. And we know, because of the data, we've lost a lot of kids this year. They're just gone from the
Yeah,
system. So I would say, please help us at Encantos really open up the aperture that technology companies and the creator economy has to include diverse story teachers.
mm,
If you can help connect us to companies who are interested in engaging in these issues around technology and children and education, and more specifically, how to connect creators onto this platform, it will allow us to put story teachers in front of kids across the world that reflect them and their backgrounds. And that way, they feel included in their education.
That's great. So we have our marching orders.
You got
Ana
your marching
Maria,
order.
thank you so much for your time today and for your leadership, not just at Encantos, but your entire life. Um, you're truly an inspiration, and can't thank you enough for everything you've done and for being with us today.
Well, if there's anything I can do for anybody on the call today, I'm here in service. And Pedro, congratulations on your success and your team's success. You are such an important member of our community. You continue every day to highlight the talent across this globe, and we're ready.
We're
Put us
ready.
in, coach.
We're ready. That's right. Put us in, coach, or we're going to take over the game. Thank you, Ana Maria.